Right, this is a properly serious and impactful video. The way that our games are being made is changing. The collective insanity of paying hundreds of maxed out salaries in the most expensive development cluster on Earth, California, is winding down. Things are changing. One upshot of that is, say, Space Marine 2, costing half of what Doom Eternal did, even though it was made on a more inflated dollar, a similarly long timescale, and in fact was made by a significantly larger team. That was all because of outsourcing. And done well, outsourcing can be fantastic. It can actually be a ladder up into the industry, but it cuts both ways. Do you remember the people nets that were placed around Foxconn facilities? You know, outside windows? Well, today, unfortunately, is going to be a story along those lines. It's an important one, and it does impact the games that are made and that you play. The victims of today's story worked on Assassin's Creed Shadows, Age of Empires 4, and The Last of Us Part 1 Remastered. So this is not a story about some niche game that nobody's ever heard about that's a total aberration. This is about AAAs that we have purchased and played. I mean, I've played AoE 4. In 2021, People Make Games' investigation showed us how publishers exploit workers having weaker rights in, say, regions like many places in Southeast Asia for cheaper development costs. But they then followed up their story, and their 2024 follow-up reveals something that is far more disturbing. This is Brandoville Studio, a self-described, per their Instagram bio, leading AAA art and animation studio located in Jakarta, which is the capital of Indonesia. And they worked on Assassin's Creed, The Last of Us Part 1 Remaster, and such huge, high-budget projects. But behind those polished assets and animations lay a fairly horrifying daily reality for the people who worked there. The details in the People Make Games video are shocking. They are physical, they are mental, there is wage theft, and they are specific. It is not generic stuff, it is horrible. We can barely begin to breach the surface, and it would be wrong to just rehash their work. You should check their work out for that story. But what we can do here is we can expand on how and why their Western partners treat them like that. And I want you to think about that. A studio contributing to some of gaming's largest titles was allegedly abusing its workers, and we barely heard a peep. That's because this ecosystem, studios like that, it's all invisible by design. That's the very thing that lets them get away with such levels of rampant cost-cutting, because it's far away and nobody really knows the name. Outside of the Gamers coverage last September, Western media largely ignored it, and even in Indonesia, it only made waves after the company went under and things properly came out. All credit and notoriety goes to the intellectual property, to the publisher and the lead studio, like Naughty Dog. It's just like how if you go and watch, for some reason, a big studio popcorn movie, and at the end you look at the credits, and you just see the countless Indian VFX studios rocket past with so many employees. And you're no doubt aware, because I think everyone is by now, how screwed the VFX industry is in the West and how it's almost certainly worse over there. And the rough reality is it is absolutely possible to profit from exploitation, but there is always some form of cost. I mean, there's the obvious human one, but also, why do all your movies look like slop? That's the sort of thing I know we've all felt. And you may still say, hang on a second, Foxconn, installers of said PeopleNets, make iPhones, and iPhones are really high quality. They're basically great. Yeah, that's because every iPhone is the same. It's literally a factory line. Games and VFX are not factory lines. They are bespoke art. Farming out art, like it's just an iPhone assembly line, is bad. Shockingly. And worse, it kills the ecosystem. And that is not just a piece of fluff, because 2020's events make the cost of this clear. This is Certain Affinity, and they are a Texas-based support studio, and the chances are that you have played their work, be that Left 4 Dead, Doom 2016, Prey, Hogwarts Legacy, Call of Duty, and Halo. So much Halo. They're talented, they have a proven track record, and yes, they are actually related to a horror story from Indonesia, because sadly, this is a story where short-term corporate greed pits workers' interests against themselves and against their futures. What happened to Certain Affinity is rough because their bread and butter work the support work that's now being farmed out dried up. Put simply, fewer and fewer big companies had gigs for them. And 2024 marked a pretty horrible first in their 17-year history. Layoffs, 10% of their headcount gone. And in a way it would get worse because shortly after that they sold to an Irish support studio megacorp called Keywinds. And even when you read the founder's very polished press release comments, it's kind of clear what's up because he says, and bear in mind, this isn't a polished press release. At this most difficult time in the market, we're thrilled to be able to provide stability and a supportive home for our team. Yes, I mean, basically that makes it clear this was a matter of survival. Certain Affinity survived, but many other support studios did not survive, be that Paladin, Puny Human, Counterplay, and others, even throughout 2024, and that's probably going to get worse. There is an accelerating wave of Western support studio closures and consolidation, with the latter, consolidation, almost certainly leading to job losses, even if it is just removing duplication. And you may say, but that removal of duplication is fantastic. It makes the market more efficient. It does in an immediate sense. But less independence and more consolidation means less competition. When there's less competition, that is bad for everybody, including you. Bad actors, enter your favorite big publisher here, get away with worse when there is not robust competition. That means they treat you worse and they treat their workers worse. And to properly understand this, there's a foundational assumption that we need to work into our mental model of the industry. You, I, and developers think that a game studio exists to make games. That's only true on one level, because far too often, it's not the developers that run the studios. It's not the developers who control the coin purse, and what the studios are, in reality, is a financial instrument. Rather than constant emotional reaction to headlines, let's understand the systems. Let's understand how this is actually working. We've all seen the trend that everybody loses bar the executives who very rarely bear responsibility for their decisions. Now, the fundamental thing is the gaming workforce is global, so imagine that you work on the corporate end of a game studio or publisher. You are less concerned about the actual games. You're actually also less concerned about the strategic stuff. No, your KPIs, OKRs, and perhaps even your personal bonuses, if, say, you're in the financial side of things, are going to be based on the likes of your cost savings, financial efficiency, because to you, games are generic widgets and your job is to optimize the line items of those widgets. Now, remember this guy, Armin Zezra. I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but what happened is Activision rammed him into Blizzard Entertainment as chief financial officer. Looking at his history, he's very much the Ivy League type of guy. He came from Procter & Gamble, who, by the way, are not a video games company. They make soap and so on, which means that he really was well prepared for his job at Blizzard. And in Jason Schreier's book, Investigating Blizzard, sources spoke of how he did not understand games. One example was literally just wanting to open another studio as if it was as easy as just opening another soap factory. And it's in this context that we finally loop back round to the situation in Indonesia that People Make Games talked about. Because in this context, with the sorts of incentives that those people will have in these organizations, if Brandoville can output similar quality assets for less money and act as a black box that you don't need to think about, saving you money versus, say, hiring certain Affinity with their Texas and Toronto-based teams that are backed by vast years of experience, well, that's great. The thing that you need is the assets, and you need them for less money. You've achieved that. Good job. Just that, in this case, your job done like that for short-term reasons. Maybe it's your OKRs, your objectives and key results. Maybe it's your bonus. Well, the problem is those short-term things are killing the industry. I'm sure you've seen it around. It's the idea of being a dumb optimizer. If you over-optimize today, you can end up killing tomorrow. If you outsource too much work, your studio will lose its creative identity. Your artists who would be leading art and doing a lot of art themselves will then turn into outsourcing managers, which is probably not what they're passionate about, and we recently saw this at Riot Games as one example. Your production more and more begins to resemble a factory line. The cheap sugar rush of low-cost East Asian labor enables all of the hell conditions like what People Make Games exposed. But the thing is, that sugar rush tastes good. It does save you real money. You do get real assets at the end of the day. And work that used to go to, say, certain Affinity dries up. Waves of studios therefore end up downsizing, dying out, consolidation happens, and with that, the institutional knowledge of large-scale game development in our industry dies out. We're left with a Western games industry that is more consolidated and therefore more fragile and with less competition. And it's that consolidation of power, IP, projects and finances that gives all the power to the people who will be shopping their projects around to the various outsourcing studios in a race to the bottom, not unlike what we see in the VFX industry. And to be clear, it is absolutely the case that there are outsourcing studios out there providing real good jobs where it is a good situation and great games are made and supported. That's fantastic. But as in this example, there are outsourcing places located in countries with lax labor laws that end up being human meat grinders. That's rather obviously bad. It burns talent, it depresses those game sectors. And what happens is that hucksters who are looking for a quick buck, regardless of the human costs, the Frank Reynolds of the games industry, they are selected for in this ecosystem. And that means there will be more and more of them. Who wins? The person who wants to pay more for healthy outsourcing and good creative decisions to make the best product, or the people who control the purse strings and is very happy to get into bed with a group like Brandoville, a black box, outputting assets, no questions asked, but it's suspiciously cheap, all so that they can support underinvestment in their core studio and furthering the deep brain drain causing atrophy that we see everywhere in the industry. And that does matter for you, even if all you care about is self-interest and you getting good games. Now, Ubisoft have responded to this story, so let's bring this goddamn thing home. If these sorts of working conditions happened in an internal Ubisoft studio, there would be a media firestorm, rightly so. But as it is, this was underreported on because it's a company far, far away with no name recognition, and people don't really associate them with the games they were a part of. You don't think of Brandoville and think, oh, of course, the people who helped in The Last of Us Part 1 Remastered. I mean, if you're a journalist in the current media ecosystem, good luck getting SEO-derived clicks from that story, which is why it doesn't end up getting covered as much as it should. And when it finally broke, Ubisoft only issued one statement to Eurogamer. In their statement, they said, "We are deeply disturbed by the recent reports surrounding Brandoville Studios. We strongly condemn all forms of abuse, and our thoughts are with the affected employees." Those are nice words. It is also, quite literally, the most minimum action they could take. But it is an action. There was not a peep from Microsoft or Naughty Dog. Even though they both worked with that studio, they did not acknowledge the story. Ubisoft did the bare minimum, but at least they did something. They acknowledged that a bad thing happened at that place that they outsourced work to. Naughty Dog and Microsoft are counting on you not noticing their association, and they likely have strategized that if they respond, well, then there's a story about them responding, and that would transmute this from a story that nobody would recognize into a story that just about everybody would recognize. So obviously they won't do it, and they'll just hope it passes them by. It is counting on you not noticing in the same way that they count on you just eating up whatever you are served, and us not drawing the connection between decreased game quality, decreased innovation, and such practices as this one. But this video shows that we actually should care that this is important. And yeah, it is ethically important, I think. Absolutely. But even if it is only from your own pure self-interest, if all that you want is good video games, then the loss of talent, the short-termism, and the consolidation are all a problem eroding the foundations of this industry. Now, of course, outsourcing can be done well, and wage arbitrage is actually a part of how some developing economies and their game sectors can catch up. Done right, this can be a win-win. Done blindly to save a quick buck and instituted by people who don't actually care about what their studios produce, the CFO types, or perhaps to get away with absurd timelines that nobody should accept, as is seen in the VFX industry, which leads to, well, modern movies often looking like modern movies, even though they're on humongous brands with hundreds of millions of dollars, looking like slop. Do you want the creative flourishes in a game that are born of the experience that makes a moment within a game special, that makes it feel like it's a piece of art made by a human? Do you want that to be sanded down and painted over by a generic torrent of black box labor, all as core studios are underinvested in because everything just turns into cost optimization? Because if you want that, then great, let's have more of this. But I have a suspicion you've got taste and also don't like this, that you don't like craft turning into a factory line. The best that we can do is to be aware, to be vigilant, and to act accordingly. Because it's all too easy to get lost in the daily churn of information being everywhere, and to therefore miss the underlying systems and trends that produce the things that we see, right? You don't want to be Neo at the start of the Matrix. You want to be Neo when he can see the code that's making everything run, right? And that means understanding the systems and the incentives that produce the decisions, the results of which we end up seeing. And if you want a fantastic example of that, I'll whet your appetite with a little bit of a fun fact. Did you know that in real terms, player investment in video games, the amount of money that people are spending on games, is not flat, but it's shockingly close to flat. That's actually one of the things driving the crazy decision making that we see in the industry. And if you want to understand that and a hell of a lot more, check out this video next.